If you haven't watched part 1 already, please make sure to go and do that, because this is sort of a continuation from that discussion.
Expose this.
How can I live?
He lied.
I cried.
Genocide of the Uyghurs.
Am I misbehaving that much that you think I'll go to prison?
I want to start by talking about, obviously last podcast we highlighted the absolute atrocity facing Uyghurs today and the scale of it, and how there are parallels. Whilst the aim is not to compare it to Nazism, there are clearly parallels. I want to talk about a bit about foreign policy regarding China from both a US and a UK perspective, because I think in some ways they're actually quite different. So Andrew, I'll start with you. I remember reading an interview where you're scared about the lack of international support for Uyghurs, and just like with Jews in concentration camps, how it took several years for people to actually respond. Why are you so scared about this, and what do you think has been the response from Eurocentric countries?
I'm angry because the Muslim world hasn't stood up for their co-Muslims when they needed their help desperately. If you're going to point out one organization, the United Nations has allowed the Muslim nations to have one grouping to represent them all, which is the OIC. And they bring out a yearly report showing how various countries are protecting and looking after their Muslims. The last OIC report praised China for doing a great job of looking after its Muslims, which is just unbelievable. That's scary. Here we have the people in power who are meant to be looking after their brothers, who have just left them to the most heinous persecution in these camps. Never before, except once, which was the Holocaust. You had 3 million people in concentration camps together, suffering. And the world needs to do something about that. The countries around Xinjiang, the Muslim countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, go a bit further, Saudi Arabia, even Turkey, they haven't stood up to China and said, no, you can't do this, because they've been bought out. And that is really scary. A few months ago, I got stuck in Israel. And one of the people there was a graduate student from China. I asked this Chinese student, I said to her, have you heard about what's happening in Xinjiang? Because I'm interested, I campaign against it. And a Chinese national, what you get to hear. And she said she had heard about it. She'd actually heard of me because she was based in the West studying there. But she refused to talk about it. And then she got out before me. Just before she got out, she held up her mobile phone and she said, these things listen to us. And I said to her, yeah, you're right, because I'm an IT person. And what she said was right. That's the scary dystopian future world that we're living in now. Yeah. Cannot have a fair conversation on social media. You will get people in foreign countries putting across falsehoods in their point of view.
Julie, you, obviously back to more foreign policy. You're from the US, and the US, I think, is probably in a slightly different position regarding China to the UK. How is this sort of affecting the relationships, do you think, and how is this affecting the dialogue around the concentration camps and the persecution of Uyghurs?
I think, for example, the passage of the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act was extremely important. Unfortunately, a lot of Americans, like an average citizen, don't seem to realize that passed with unanimous support. And this is almost unheard of in US politics right now, where everything is partisan, that it had bipartisan support, and that it, save for one vote, passed, unanimously. And so that's really good, but I think that more Americans need to be made aware of that, because a lot of times with the media, stuff gets framed as, well, if the US chooses to address China, it's because of a political reason. And I just find that argument somewhat irrelevant at this point, because it's like, everything's political. Everyone knows everything's political, but this issue should not be political. This is a human rights issue. So if something is being done politically to address it, I fully support it. And as someone who works a lot with people that work in government here, I can attest that a lot of times our media here is looking for the most controversial story, and they'll try to make everything framed about Trump. But there are actually a lot of people that are not Trump that are advocating for the Uyghurs and have been working for a long time. So I think in a lot of ways, what's been happening with the pandemic has been a wake-up call for a lot of people that, my husband included, who's Han Chinese, he'll tell you, this was a moment for him where he realized a regime that can lie to its own people about a deadly pandemic and seek to suppress information and hide that from the world will lie about everything. But in terms of long-term goals with everything and politics, there's so much more that needs to be done, not just by the US. Understandably, the US is powerful enough in a lot of ways to address China, but this has to be an international effort. It should not be just the US.
Absolutely. And just in terms of the Muslim countries, I remember hearing about how what one Uyghur is actually really afraid of. The biggest place that Uyghurs are moving to is Turkey, right? And some of them are going to become very radical and might use violence possibly even in future, and that will act as a smear to the whole Uyghur name and the whole Uyghur campaign. So I think it's really important that countries do take a really strong response in defending the rights of these people. So on to the final sort of part of the conversation. What sort of things can they do from a personal perspective, and also what sort of things as countries we should be encouraging?
One thing I would say is it's a good place to start from to address your personal complicity in this. I think there have been a lot of really important conversations going on right now, particularly also about how Western companies and businesses are complicit in using Uyghur forced labor, for example. It's literal slavery. And we all have things that we wear and that we're using in our homes that are made by Uyghur slave labor. And that's a definitive statement. We know that, 1 in 5 clothing garments in the world, if they're made of cotton, that cotton is coming from that region. Additionally, I think educating yourself and others is extremely important. That's really, really key. Before I go into like legislative steps you can take, is please, as you're learning things, share them. We've shared some things about Chinese trolls and, being attacked and all that. Don't let that scare you off. Really engage with those issues. So taking part in those campaigns, like the Coalition to End Uyghur Forced Labor is something people can go onto the website and look that up, get involved. You can look up the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's report that came out earlier this year about which companies are complicit is an important thing to familiarize yourself with so that you can effectively boycott. Additionally, keeping in contact with your members of parliament in the US, your senators. We have great things like IPAC going on, which is an international coalition that's addressing China not participating in the Beijing Olympics. Those are important campaigns to take part in. It's not about boycotting the Olympics. It's about the Olympics should be moved. So no rights, no games. That's a hashtag campaign that's going on right now, but there's a lot of things connected to that you can also get involved in. And that is very important. Even in regards to the US ban on TikTok and WeChat, people don't understand what that's about. They think it's a personal vendetta against China. No, these are apps that are directly complicit in the genocide of Uyghurs and the oppression of people in Hong Kong and Tibetans and Mongolians and others as well, directly link to providing information that gets these people thrown in concentration camps.
All I can do is reiterate Julie's words in different words. I'm powerless. This is a campaign against the strongest power in the world. China is the future of the world. It is going to be the world's leader and the world's policeman. It's soon to take over from America. But what we're seeing is that the future world can be good or evil. And I don't want it to be an evil world. And that's part of why I'm campaigning. The first thing to do is talk about this amongst your friends and family, because Chinese culture cares very much about face. And if China is being seen as the pariah of the world, it will stop, because it will not want to be seen for what it's doing. The second thing you can do, when you get to hear about these brands which are using slave labor, so don't buy their goods until they stop using slave labor from China.
I think it's been such a useful and interesting conversation. You're both mentioning things that we and everyone watching here can actually do and actually change small parts of their life in order to try and make a difference. Another thing you could do, which is even easier, is if you could subscribe, because we're releasing soon some videos where we'll be interviewing Uyghur refugees and people who have had family locked up in concentration camps and people who have suffered most terrible things and are going to be sharing their accounts. And thank you very much once again, Julie and Andrew, for joining us. We really appreciate it, and thank you for giving up your time to discuss this really, really important issue.